Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of this room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Just a reminder that our meetings here at Basingstoke are webcast. Please, for members and guests, if we could ask you to to remind you that if you do stay, that you're giving permission for your contribution to be webcast, and then as far as the first item of the agenda, declarations of interest from anybody. And it's entitled, the paper that we've had is Many Down Development Vehicle LLP 2022-23 budget. The budget for 22-23 of 1.453 million. Notes, or asked us to note the capital provision that will be required with visiting councillors. So we've got Councillor Lee and Councillor McCormick. You both know what the drill is as far as 4 minutes. Councillor Lee, I can see you sitting on the microphone, so we'll take you first, if that's all right, and I'll give you your 1 minute warning.
I just thought I'd come along today on this one. It was certainly a surprise to see this pop up on the agenda for discussion, considering that we'd only just recently had the Many Down Overview Committee last week, where there was no apparent awareness that funding was going to be needed to support any additional activities. So I've got a real question first, is that when did officers know that funding was required? It wasn't discussed, there was no indication it was needed, and I'm concerned that there are items in this document that are substantially different from the view that we had only recently at the Many Down Overview Committee. One of those was that the position of the overarching business plan was at draft format only as of the 5th of October, and now all of a sudden it seems to have moved status very quickly. I'm also a little bit confused as to the amount of funding that is being requested for approval. The document makes it seem like it's close to £1.5 million that's being requested for approval. However, the overall cost to the council is only £360,000. I'm just would like confirmation as to what the actual amount is that you are approving tonight. What worries me as a new councillor, and I'll use that shield for a few more months anyway, is that the democratic process for which I was elected to uphold seems to be a front for smoke and mirrors. I'm confused as to why this has come here and not via any information via mock, why timelines seem to be different in mock compared to the cabinet, and I'd just like some clarity to be honest. As I mentioned at the mock, when I was 13, the land for Many Down was bought. I'm now sat here talking about the land for Many Down and the project, and I don't want my grandchildren to be sat here discussing this in 30 years' time either. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. What I'll do is I'll take Councillor McCormick's question, so it gives the Section 151 officer time to respond. Just a quick suggestion maybe, because I don't know whether you've sent the questions to the Section 151 officer before the meeting so that she can have some time to prepare. So, but just a note for the future, because you are a new councillor. Thank you very much. Councillor McCormick. When you're ready, Andy, I'll start the clock.
Thank you, Leader. Well, I definitely won't need the 4 minutes. Frankly, I'm appalled that this decision has come out this late, and I've spoken to other councillors, not just in my party, who agree with me. So my questions are, when did the council leader first know about this? Why is this so late? How much has Many Down slipped this year, and why? And finally, when can we expect the build to start? And I'll reserve my right for a supplemental.
Thank you, Councillor McCormick. So let's first go to the Section 151 officer to answer Councillor Lee's questions, if we may.
Thank you, Chair. The first question around when did officers know this was needed, this has been ongoing discussions in terms of, as you're aware, the subject that we discussed at mock, and obviously some uncertainty around when that would be resolved. As noted in the report, the councils have been pushing back on this for some time to say we're not going to accept any additional costs because it would have been at the full liability of the council. So very early, sort of the end of last week, early this week, we actually received an offer from our joint venture partner taking a proportion of the risk in relation to this expenditure, and therefore gave us an opportunity and plus gave us a further breakdown of what this spending would be for. And in reality, the decision was then made between the two councils, both Basingstoke and Hampshire, in an emergency meeting to say that actually, in terms of the expenditure that we need to incur, if we don't incur this at this time, we will at some point need to incur the expenditure, probably at a greater cost, and it will further delay the implementation of the project. And there are some time critical spend, which is why it's not waiting to the next cabinet meeting. So that kind of explains why. So when we had mock, we weren't aware of this information. So that's why it's been an urgent item. In terms of the overarching sort of business plan, I think that's just terminology. It's still draft, it's not approved, it's not been finalised, and it won't be finalised until the subject matter of mock has been resolved. And in terms of the actual sum of money requested, so the 1.453 million is the total cost to the whole partnership. 50% of that is then shared between ourselves and Hampshire, so we only pick up 25% of that cost, so that the 0.36 million is the share for Basingstoke and Deane Borough Council. The 1.453 is the total cost to the partnership.
Thank you very much, Sue. And just to come back on when did I know? I knew 24 hours before the paper was shared with group leaders and discussed with the Chair of Scrutiny. And I think it's really important, isn't it, with the items that have been discussed at mock, that I think mock is completely aware of some of the known unknowns, if I can say that phrase. So actually what this paper does is to be really specific about agreeing things that we now know as quickly as possible, so that there isn't any slippage just due to our process as far as waiting for the next cabinet meeting. And I know the papers went out as quickly as possible to everybody so that we could make this decision. Councillor McCormick or Councillor Lee, I don't know whether you wanted a supplementary.
Well, the impression I get from this is that this administration and its partners are treating the council a bit like a bank account where they can dip into the overdraft whenever they like. What I would want is some assurance, and it doesn't have to be tonight, as to where we are going with Manydown, when we can expect the build to actually start, and the fact that we are paying for additional time that's only been identified at a very late juncture doesn't give me much confidence in the ability of this borough and its partners to deliver Manydown in anything like the timescale that we might expect in accordance with the local plan, or indeed its update whenever that gets produced.
Thank you, Councillor McCormick. And as I'm sure you're aware, quite a lot of those items have already been discussed in other places, but I thank you for your question. Thank you.
Can I have an answer?
Well, I think there's more statements than questions that you've made just in there that says actually, I think all of the timescales and when things are expected have been discussed in mock.
Yeah, but the whole point is we've had a slippage here, and you haven't said how much it slipped. Why is it that we need to have this extra money? Why do we need to prolong this process? And what's the impact on the overall timescales? If I can't have an answer tonight, I would like a written answer, please.
I will get a written answer to you from the portfolio holder. I do believe that quite a lot of that has been discussed by this council. So the recommendation in front of us is that we note the progress in the production of the Manydown Development Vehicle LLP overarching business plan and the draft annual business plan. We approve the MDV LLP budget for 2022-23 of £1.453 million, and that we note the additional capital provision of £0.36 million, which will be actioned under the delegated powers by the Section 151 officer. Are we agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much, Cabinet. Then we go to item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of September 2022. Can I see for the Council's operational emissions offsetting options? And I'm going to hand over to the portfolio holder to do her introduction of the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Board administration, as a cabinet, we absolutely recognise the consequences of climate change locally but also globally, and we continue to drive hard to make changes to reduce our emissions, achieve the climate goals that we've set in our climate emergency. But we should also explore all opportunities, but it is making clear that we are not going to just relax now and think we're not going to do 2019. Since we declared that climate emergency, we haven't stood still. The Council's managed to reduce our emissions by 66%, and we continue to do lots to achieve our target of 2025. Obviously, for the borough-wide target of 2030, we need people to activities to reduce carbon emissions, and we'll continue to support others across the borough to do the same. The report sets out the different things that we are doing, but as by way of examples, it's buying renewable energy to supply our own properties, improvements in our properties which include new electric vehicles for our parking and community safety patrol officers, and we're trialling waste food oil for those vehicles where electric alternatives are less readily available. And that's when we do these things, we must always prioritise changing our actions and supporting others to do that and consume. But as I say, we don't see this as the be-all and end-all, but we do.
In clarifying what I want to say, the concept of rewilding and reforesting is absolutely sound, and it's something that we all need to do a lot more of. It does remove CO2 from the atmosphere eventually, and it can increase biodiversity if it's done properly. But there is an old adage that prevention is far better than cure, and it could not be more apt in this circumstance. If we're serious about tackling climate crisis, we have to stop emitting CO2, and the sooner the better. It's laudable that council want to spend 200,000 on planting trees to eventually remove CO2, but the word eventually is the problem. So maybe if I can put in a very simple and simplistic example. This year, the council wants to emit a tonne of CO2 on this hand. In fact, it wants to emit 1,000 tonnes, but that's another matter. So it plants an acorn. It does the same next year and the year after and the year after, each year planting an acorn. But there is a question here for you. How long does it take for that acorn to grow into a tree big enough to absorb a tonne of CO2? 1 year? 2 years? Maybe 3? No, it takes 10 to 15 years for a tree planted today to recover the carbon emissions created in its planting and to become carbon negative. So yes, your plan to reforest is to be absolutely supported, but let's be clear, reforesting does not offset this year's emissions or even next year's. What you're planning to do is offset your emissions of today and the next 3 years in 15 years' time. That does not make the council carbon neutral by 2025. It just sets the council on a path to be carbon neutral by about 2037. The Oxford principles are sound, but they make it clear offsetting is the very last resort, the very last resort. Emissions reduction come first, second and third. And it is only the most entrenched emissions, the unavoidable emissions, that should eventually be offset.
Can I ask you to wrap up, please, Mark?
Oh, sorry, wait, I thought you were going to give me the third.
I did, but I was listening to you so intently.
Oh, sorry, I've got the last paragraph and I will finish. Sorry, yeah. Offsetting is a sign of success if all possible steps have already been taken to reduce emissions. This is a sign of failure if not. So my worry today is offsetting is being used as an excuse to avoid the real issue, to continue to reduce emissions. So offsetting, very last sentence, and I promise, Mike, thank you for your forbearance. Offsetting will not make this council carbon neutral by 25. It will only a reduction in emissions can achieve that. So yes, please do plant acorns, plant thousands of them, but reduce emissions first and continue to do so with relentless focus. But please don't use offsetting as an excuse to do no more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Heath. I've got Councillor McCormick as well wishing to speak. Welcome back, Andy. I will give you your minute's notice.
Thank you, Leader. So, yes, I welcome the 2/3 reduction in emissions by 2021-22 compared to the 2018-19 baseline. I am concerned at the prospect of spending an extra £193,000 on offsets, because I think this fudges our net zero target of December 2025. This is greenwashing. We need real reductions in emissions. And I'm not sure if, even if we declare that we've met the 2025 target, that we've actually met it. In addition to the offsetting, a great many council-owned community halls have been excluded from any analysis as they're, quote, operated by third parties, unquote, and the measures to improve the ones that we do have are pushed back as close to 2025 as possible. Some of the assessments haven't even started yet, 3 years after we declared a climate emergency, with only 3 years left to go. The paper itself lacks substance and detail. I have a number of questions. Question 1, where are we with our efforts to further remove emissions? That wasn't clear in the paper. Question 2, what obstacles stand in our way? Question 3, what is happening with our vehicles and those contracted to perform our statutory duties, such as waste collection? Question 4, what is happening with our buildings? Question 5, if the council was prepared to fudge its 2025 objective, what confidence can any member of the public have that this council will meet its much harder 2030 objective of carbon neutrality for the entire borough? And I reserve my right to a supplemental. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor McCormick. I'll get Councillor Regis to respond.
Thank you to both of you for your input. So, Martin, I think my introduction answered your point that and to Andy as well. It isn't a fudge, it isn't an excuse to do nothing more, it's just an addition. And I have been, the minute offsetting was discussed as a cabinet, we were clear from the outset, and I would hope the paper comes across like that. But I do want to absolutely reassure everybody that we don't see this as an excuse to do nothing, and we take the climate change and the climate emergency and our admissions very seriously, and are doing a lot of work moving forward to continue to reduce our emissions. And I don't see this as an excuse to now sit back and say, oh, we've done nothing. So, and then in relation to the issues that Andy has raised around waste collection, what's happening to our buildings, etc., all of that is coming. We've got a climate change update coming to CEP in November in a couple of weeks. So the report covers off most of those issues, so that will deal with that. And if you've got questions, you can always email me, but literally the report will be out, 2 weeks' time for CEP, so that deals with most of those issues.
Andy, I'm going to indulge you because the paper is about offsetting. It isn't about our plans as far as climate reduction, unless you had something else you wanted to say or comment on.
Well, while I accept that it's an option, I think the points raised by Green and Basingstoke are very salient to this, that if we do end up using this, we've basically missed our target, because if you plant trees, it takes years for them to get to a point where they're taking more carbon dioxide out than has been generated in the first few years of their lives, because trees breathe oxygen as they're growing. But I did have some supplementals in terms of, I mean, we are on track. I would like a frank admission that we're not on track to meet our 2030 target, because I think that the sooner we're upfront and honest about that with the electorate, the better. And what conversations are being had with the government on this, and what confidence can we have that they'll deliver, given that the government wants to reintroduce fracking, thereby breaking a 2019 manifesto commitment in the process.
Thank you, Councillor McCormick. I'm not going to ask Councillor Eaches because I think that's going to be a fundamental element of the discussion at CEP about where we are delivering on our 2025-2030. I do want to make something abundantly clear. I absolutely agree with the words of the wonderful Jane Austen that it isn't what we say or think that defines us, it's what we do. This isn't the answer. I think everybody in the room knows this isn't the answer, but it is the responsible thing to do. This isn't about what we emit in the future. This is about what we've emitted since our climate declaration, which is 3 years ago. It is my strongly held belief that to do nothing for the carbon that has been emitted would be negligent. And I'm not about to sit here and do that as the leader of the council, and nor am I cabinet. We fundamentally believe we should be taking action. There are not many things in this world that if you are creating some form of damage, you would not try to mitigate it. And if we are serious about how important climate change is to this council, we absolutely shouldn't take that approach with our climate objectives. As Councillor Eaches has said, it is not the answer, and we do not see it as the answer to achieving our 2020, 30 or 2025 targets. But it is a reality that we sit here in 2022, nearly 2023, and if we thought about our biggest service delivery, which is the bin trucks, there is currently no non-urban authority that has an 100% fleet of electric bin trucks. So there is a reality about that that says we have to do our best in the absence of the ability to do that. So it is the right thing to do. Offsetting, and it's a phrase I don't actually like, has had a really bad reputation, and I think it is truly shocking that it is so difficult to buy credits from schemes that meet the new best practice targets. It is also, therefore, important that we use our leadership role to stimulate, encourage, and develop the ways in which ourselves and other large employers, people who are running business premises, and we know within the carbon emissions that industry hasn't got solutions for all sorts of things for 2030, that we do our best to stimulate those initiatives that achieve the highest of standards. And also, although we perhaps don't have much peat bog in Basingstoke and Dean, let's visit it, Martin. Take me on a visit. I'll come and see it. It's really important we find all the things that we can do locally for all of those people and organisations who want to join us on this journey, and then we can encourage all those people who are perhaps more reluctant because it's difficult. I can't believe how difficult it is to mitigate the carbon that's happened in the last 3 years in a way that is acting responsibly. So I think it's the right thing to do. I completely support the recommendations. The recommendations are set out very clearly about what we want to do and not how we perceive it, because I'm sure all sorts of people will want to throw stones at us as a local authority to say we are greenwashing. This is absolutely not greenwashing. This is taking responsibility for our activities in a way that not many organisations are, and I want us to be 100% clear about that. The recommendations make that very clear. The recommendations are long, so I don't intend to read them out. Cabinet, can I have your support in implementing the recommendations? Brilliant. Thank you very much. Moving on to our next agenda item, which is the draft parking strategy. I will ask the portfolio holder to introduce the paper.
Thank you, Leader. Draft parking strategy paper in front of us today supports Council's priorities through promoting more sustainable and better transport options and connections, responding to climate emergency and improving health and mental well-being. So the emerging Town Centre Master Plan visualises a future town with development and exciting potential changes to ensure that it is an attractive place for people to live, work and visit, recognising its importance in the borough and in the wider context. So the accessibility is key for the town centre, and it is recognised there is a need for a renewed parking strategy. So this needs to be provide a robust framework to ensure that the objectives of the master plan can be achieved, that visitors have convenient locations to park, and that viability of the town centre is preserved and enhanced for its investments. So in this respect, it is important that the right number of spaces are provided in the right location to meet the differing needs of those visiting Basingstoke, and that accessibility to the central area matches the ambitions in the master plan. So to meet this requirement, a draft strategy on how we manage our parking stock and provide for parking in the future enable more sustainable active travel and support town centre activities has been developed. So this builds upon the aims and objectives in the key documents such as the wellbeing strategy that associated with transport and climate change to established an approach to guiding parking provision in the future. I'm keen to seek views on the approach to future parking provision and to ensure we continue to meet needs in the most effective and appropriate way, recognising changes in behaviour, especially in this post-COVID world, both travel and retail, and recognising that some car parks are underutilised. Accordingly, the strategy provides a framework for future decision taking as well as the actions to undertake to ensure the approach to parking is most effective. So tonight, this report to Cabinet seeks endorsement of the draft parking strategy ahead of public consultation, with adoption of the strategy proposed alongside the master plan in later this year.
Thank you, Councillor Ganesh. We have one visiting speaker who's asked to speak, which is, I've got Councillor McCormick and, oh, actually that's two, McCormick and Lee. Let's go with you first, Alex. Sorry, that's me misreading it.
Thank you very much, Leader. Again, with my new councillor hat on, very good that we are thinking of these sorts of strategies. It's, you know, unbeknownst to me that this sort of thing goes on, and I'm learning something new every day. It's right that vehicle movement has shifted since the pandemic, and we can only look around some of the estates that we represent to see that parking has increased and become more of a problem within the estates. Car parks are becoming emptier throughout the town centre. But this strategy will only work around all your other strategies that are in place. We've got a drop in funding for public transport. We are thinking about the top of town and how we can bring footfall back to the top of town. And what I worry is that we make some drastic changes to car parking within the town centre that affects those wider issues for us. Also, points to consider is that we've got an ageing population, as the census has recently highlighted. Without a doubt, they're going to rely a lot heavier on to get around the town. You know, it's inevitable with a poor public service provision. I pick up from my residents in Winklebury and Mellydown that the buses are inevitably late. They crammed full at times, which concerns me. School children in the morning and around the evening time. And also, I'm concerned how this will work in conjunction with the fact that HCC are taking some of the parking elements in-house and how that might affect our strategy going forward. Also, going back to the smoke and mirrors that I raised in the first time I spoke on item 3A, is this item ever going to come to one of the committees? I don't think I've seen it on CEP. I note that it was the draft report was made in September, so I can only assume that it's going to come to one of the committee meetings before it goes to a public consultation. And that is it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Councillor Lee, for your contribution. There's some valuable comments around the local transport and public bus network and the HCC's intention of taking some of the parking in-house. I might be able to get back to you with a written answer on some of those. This paper will be going to EPH next month. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Leader. So, I've read through its paper, and it is a really weak paper. At 70 pages, it's full of tables, but it lacks any real substance. There's indications that car park use is down. It's not really stating why. I think we ought to know why. This could be for a number of reasons. It could be the pandemic, it could be the cost of living crisis, it could be shops going out of business, reducing the retail offer and attraction to the town centre. There doesn't appear to be any firm proposals to achieve the aims and objectives set out in section 2.1. But what I do know is that we are way behind where we should be in installing electric charge points. And a glance at the tables on page 48, 49 shows a woeful lack of charging points. Most of our car parks don't have any. Nothing in this paper gives me any confidence that we will tackle this issue with substantial numbers of extra charge points being installed either in our car parks or on the road in time for a projected 50% of cars being electric in the next 7 years. Electric car sales already outstrip those of diesel cars in this country. Our parking charges, especially late at night, do little to stimulate our daytime or nighttime economy in the town centre. I have some questions. First one is, how many extra charge points can we expect to be installed in the next 3 years? The second one is, how many parking bays are going to be removed? And the third one is, are we going to be building on car parks to get our housing numbers up? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Councillor McCormick. I'm happy to get back to you with the answers on all three in writing. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I think it's for me, before we go to the recommendation, there is something that says we need to be really clear this is draft, it's going to public consultation. There's also something, isn't it, that says, I think it's, for me, it's really interesting because we often talk about parking and actually the future of the car. Well, actually, we should spend a lot of time talking about the future of the internal combustion engine and what that means. And also space for transport rather than necessarily space for car, because once you take any sort of drastic measures about car parks, actually you are taking some space out, which is really difficult to put back. I'm pleased to see about some comparisons about local towns and cities, which I always find very interesting, as far as there is much said in this chamber, but actually it's really useful to have some evidence-based comparison about other places, and I'm pleased to see that it says we are well supplied as a town as far as car parking spaces. It does present lots of difficulties, which is why I think it's really, really important that we get feedback from residents, because we don't yet know what recovery from lockdowns and coming out of the pandemic means for the use of our car parks. We don't necessarily know where habits will settle. I think it also gives us an opportunity to think about the car parks that we provide versus the car parks that other people provide. We know that perhaps the car parks provided by the rail companies perhaps are better placed to deal with those that are potentially commuting by rail in the future, because they are well catered for by the station car park, and also there is extra capacity and flexibility built into the way that that car park has been structured. I am also pleased to see that the Hampshire County Council's recent executive decision day supported what we're talking about as far as the transport and potential parking strategy in the report that he supported. And also perhaps some of the concerns that have been mentioned are slightly different in our town, because having an outer ring road and what feels a little bit like an inner ring road deals with some of those structural issues that other towns struggle to deal with in a more linear nature for how their strategic road network works. So the recommendation that we have in front of us is that, Sorry, other comments. Sorry, Jenny, I didn't. So, Councillor Vaux.
Thank you very much, Leader. I welcome this report. I found it very interesting and well structured, and I thought it put its case really well. The one area that I was slightly concerned about is around taxis. I think that we hear from residents, well, I don't think I know that we hear from residents that there are times in the week when they struggle to access taxis in the town, and for me that's a safety issue, particularly at the times they're talking about. It's important that we get that right. So if we're going to change our parking availability and we're thinking about park and stride and all these other things, I would like to bring in the provision of taxis in the town into that whole equation, please. Is it okay?
I get that, and it's one of the reasons why I feel so passionate about our proposed introduction of a car club as well. So providing more options where either you can't or choose not to have your own personal vehicle, that you do have those options available to you. So I think that's a case well made. I don't know whether anybody else, so I don't miss anybody else want to make a comment? No? Right, in that case, go back to the recommendation. It's to endorse the appended draft parking strategy so it can go out for public consultation as outlined in this report. Are we all agreed? Right, then we move on to performance measures for 2022-23. It has been backwards and forwards as far as the scrutiny committee, so I don't intend to do an introduction to it, but we do have another visiting speaker from Councillor Tuck. Councillor Tuck, welcome. You have 4 minutes, and I'll let you know when you've got 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chair. The Scrutiny Committee proposed a new indicator for corporate KPIs on the basis that the EA are not monitoring our water quality on an annual basis, then we must do that ourselves. I'm not sufficiently familiar with the test or itching, but know that the Loddon has now only 2 monitoring points. These are Lodge Farm and Keeper's Cottage, for which I found monthly stats. I do not know if this measures water flow as well, but it needs to. In addition, I propose that a further monitoring site is at the source of the river at Crabtree Black Dam, say 30 metres or so downstream from the beloved Gabions. This would give us baseline data from the source springs. Recent council documents have stated that the EA will go to 3-year reporting cycles. This is wholly unacceptable. The EA provides quarterly reporting on the River Wye catchment, so continuing our annual reporting is entirely reasonable. Basingstoke's location on the source of the River Loddon Chalk stream means that water flow volume and water quality are extremely vulnerable. In addition, the aquifer is over-abstracted. This means there simply isn't the volume of water to dilute the output from the STW or from other sources such as runoff. Justification for annual monitoring can be found in the local plan, the planning inspector's report on the local plan, the annual monitoring report, and the statement of common ground between the EA, Thames Water and BDBC. The current local plan states, given the need to 6.47, given the need to ensure that proposed growth does not cause harm to the ecology or the biological quality of the River Loddon catchment or any other water body in the borough, the EA's monitoring outcomes will be reported through the AMR process and development will be managed accordingly. The Council is committed to supporting the objectives of the Water Framework Directive by working towards the delivery of the actions set out for this Council in the relevant river basin management plans and local catchment plans in partnership with the Environment Agency and other organisations. The Planning Inspector notes that Policy EM6 seeks to protect, manage and improve the quality of the borough's water environment. And at his point 288, there are related concerns over abstraction and the level of phosphates in the water resulting from the level of development required by the plan. The phosphate level in the river is governed by consents, and EA has accepted that abstraction on the River Loddon is a significant challenge. The final paragraph of Policy EM6 sets a framework to prevent the deterioration of water quality which could arise through contamination, and this accords with the requirement in paragraph 109 of the framework. Section 291, the report, this is Planning Inspector, the report also advocates annual monitoring of river quality, which is included in the plan, both in relation to Policy SS4 and EM6. They were challenged on the fact that monitoring being insufficiently frequent to be effective at monitoring once a year. In addition, the inspector says policy to operate in a precautionary manner in the interests of conserving and enhancing the natural environment and reducing pollution as required in paragraph 17 of the framework, which enables the necessary, it goes on, the necessary action to be taken in advance of potential damage to water quality as opposed to reacting once damage has already been caused. The plan is to be monitored on an annual basis in accordance with the regulations. Finally, in the Statement of Common Ground between the EA, Thames Water and BDBC, we say, however, it is recommended that continuous environmental monitoring is undertaken during the construction of new developments. I'll try and edit. The EA to undertake routine monitoring at an extensive number of river monitoring points along the River Loddon.
Can I ask you to wrap up, please? Samples
taken a year. After my own extensive trawling, the extensive number of sites is down to 2. Due to the environmental sensitivity of the River Loddon and the caveats on the modelling results, annual monitoring will be undertaken to ensure no deterioration. In summary, annual monitoring and reporting is essential, especially given the expected impacts of climate change. A KPI on water quality will ensure the borough's ambitions are environmentally sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tuck. I think it's really important that we put on record that I truly appreciate your focus on water quality. And I share your concerns around some of our statutory environmental bodies not perhaps doing the standard of work that we would like to see, and that potentially gives us some cause to have confidence on whether we are protecting our environment collectively in the way that you state and that we have stated several times in our policies, and in a practical way that we're doing everything to monitor and protect with some of the activity that happens, particularly in our river catchments. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all of the recommendations in order, otherwise it'll get very confusing because we know the document with all of the KPIs in it is quite long, and you will pick up a response to your point when I come to that element, if that's okay. Is that all right? Brilliant, thank you very much. I would like to thank our scrutiny committee for the clarity of their final recommendations on the third visit to their committee. Just to go through individually a response to the recommendations. And again, this is where I unfold the large document as far as the whole table of all of the KPIs. I have a suspicion that we may have one of the largest tables of KPIs that's been seen in a local authority. So if we go to the first page, the first recommendation I had was for ISD01, which is reduction and percentage in antisocial behaviour. And there was a recommendation as far as how the percentages and reductions are shown as far as below and greater than, and I didn't like the use of the symbol, so quite happy to agree that. With ISE01, which is the number of homeless households with dependent children placed into bed and breakfast during the quarter. Again, there was just about amending the target in line with the previous years of it being described as actual of 14, which I'm more than happy to agree. Then for ISEO 8, to ensure the minimum levels of rough sleeping are maintained and reduce the target to 0. I suspect we're talking about semantics here. We have an absolute targeted focus with incredible support from national government and our partners to make sure it goes to 0 and stays at 0. It would be our view that we would want to be realistic and have and keep the target as at 2, so that we know, instead of I'm thinking about the smokes and mirrors comment that was made earlier, but let's be really clear, we won't be happy until we get it to 0, but realistically, we get people who come and go before all of the activities and all of the work by all of our partners has happened. So I don't accept that recommendation. Then we go to the recommendation PEA01B, which was increased percentage in household waste, recycled garden waste. And the recommendation we got was, there was a comment about the achievability of the target considering the level of service during 21-22. The level of service that our residents have received on the garden waste service has been completely unacceptable, and we should put our focus on achieving our targets, not reducing them downwards. So we will look at sticking with our target, and I agree on the achievability, but we will strive to do it. And the issues have been recognised by Serco. On PEA 06, this is the same comment and recommendation regarding how the target is actually articulated as far as symbols, signs and numbers. So quite happy to change that in line with the recommendation. There was a proposal for a new indicator about the percentage of contaminated bins, and what that meant as far as the amount of waste which is lost due to contamination. I think at this point in time, because the suggested KPIs have been to scrutiny, what I would propose to do is look at how we can get a KPI that does something that covers what the recommendation is trying to suggest in next year's KPIs and going forwards. We do have quite a lot of information that's available from the contractor in Serco, and contamination levels are recorded at the materials recovery facility that's run by Hampshire County Council, so I'm sure we can come up with something which is meaningful that deals with that. Then for PEB 08, ensuring that energy audits of all operational property are carried out by July 2022, and to develop a programme to make changes to reduce carbon usage. The recommendation was about including community buildings. There are key targets to measure reductions already in place as far as the framework, whether it be council offices and for other council-owned properties. For me, there is something with the new council plan that we're working on that we should deal specifically with community buildings separately, so that is something that we will look at introducing. There was a proposal for a new indicator about water quality, which Councillor Tuck so eloquently spoke to. I think it's really important that instead of agreeing to it, what I'd quite like to do, because it sort of suggests that perhaps we can do it for ourselves, I'd quite like to explore how we get the Environment Agency to do what we would like first. So I think it's really important that we look at that and see what's achievable. Councillor Tuck, just one thing, because I am, as I'm sure you're aware, given quite a lot of notes from officers. I think there may be some misunderstanding and miscommunication, because I'm told that quite a lot of monitoring happens, potentially on a monthly basis. we may be discussing, and it may be language in some of the reports that we have, is that the classification happens more infrequently. So the monitoring happens, but actually public classification is not dealt with to deal with variability of weather and rainfall, etc., etc. So again, I think we need to explore what are the facts, what's out there, what's really happening, and how we can influence it. And if we can't influence it, how do we try and influence it some more? I think is what I would suggest that we do. Then there was a proposal for missed bins and the number of bins. We know, don't we, that actually waste collection is our number one service. We have had issues. I have put on record our collective dissatisfaction with where the service is. So I think it's very important that we demonstrate to our residents the activity that is already going on as far as the KPI measurement, the articulation of that, what that means for our assessment of the quality of the service. So absolutely, I think it's really important that we look at that. What I'd quite like to do is build that into the new council plan so that we can link it really clearly to what we're trying to achieve. So I sort of half take that and we'll just have to come up with a plan. For the next recommendation, which is PED08, which is planting new trees. I think we fundamentally agree with it. We just need to find a way of measuring it and whether anybody already has some data that can help. At a recent conference, I had a conversation with the Woodlands Trust and another conversation with them over the weekend, and I think they have some really useful information at a ward level that may help us to understand what information is available that we can use without spending a lot of time doing the work before we can actually do the activity that makes a difference. So that would be my suggestion on that one. So again, hopefully we can introduce that from the new council plan. There's a proposal for a new KPI that measures tree canopy. I hope the Woodland Trust can help us with that, with the data that they have. I think there is a reality that says it's potentially really difficult. Some additional information, because again, it's always really useful when questions are asked by our overview and scrutiny committees and we go and find out what information is available. I think it's worth putting on record that there was a suggestion that we should have a target for tree canopy as a percentage. When we've had a look as an authority as far as what do those people who specialise on it suggest as a potential target, that the level should be at least 20%. I think for me the really interesting information for that is with the data that's already available from the same source, that we're sort of either slightly above or slightly below, literally 21% above in rural wards, in Basingstoke as a whole, with us being slightly under as far as 19.8 within the Basingstoke town area. So again, I think there is some interesting data out there will help us to understand what we can do that will make a difference. I do think we also need to be really clear about what's within our gift. We may own quite a lot of property, but with the size of the borough that we have, it suddenly pales into insignificance with how much everybody else owns. We're still a minority stakeholder. Then moving on to PEC01, which is increase in the number of borough-operated electrical vehicle charges in the borough. Absolutely agree to look at what information we've got so that we can provide that to scrutiny. Then moving on to strengthening communities, there's another suggestion for a new indicator, which was about regeneration. Regeneration for me is one of those words that it means lots of things to lots of people. So for me, there's something about, I think we should look at what regeneration means by definition, how that fits into our priorities as they are articulated in the new council plan for the next year going forwards, so that we can absolutely identify what we mean by regeneration, what we identify as success. Again, thinking about some of the partners that we need to work with. So that we can come up with that. Then moving to planning for the future. If I move to PFC 03, which is the total number of new affordable homes being completed. Absolutely, I believe that information is around so we can agree a breakdown for further information as far as whether it's 1 bed, 2 bed, 2 bed house, etc., etc. So we should have that information. It should be relatively easy to provide. There's a proposal for considering a KPI measuring the quality of homes built. Sadly, although I absolutely love it, as somebody who has, with my ward colleagues, a ward which has a significant amount of new build in it, I do think it's particularly difficult to measure with the measurements that are currently available. So I don't think we can agree it, but it's something absolutely I'd quite like to explore. What do we mean by it? What information is out there? And what can we do to get the people who build new homes in our borough to fundamentally pick up their game with the quality of properties that they deliver to our residents. There's another proposal for the future home standard. I think that is really, really important as far as understanding what that means for delivering our council priorities, because I do think it will be in there with our new plan, but just making sure we weave that into our council plan, our priorities and what it is measuring and whether it gives us enough. So I think the future home standard can really help. And lastly, I think there's another proposal for empty homes. So whether we can look at the number of empty homes, the length of time that they've been empty, the number of long-term empty, so 2 years plus. Absolutely, I fully accept that. I think historically we've been a borough with a relatively low number of empty homes. It shouldn't mean that we don't focus on it, because it's an area that we can really make a difference as far as turning empty homes into something that can be occupied and help those people who need somewhere to live. I think it'll take a while, so my suggestion is that we put it forward to the New Year's council plan. So just taking that all into account, what we have is responded to the recommendations from scrutiny, and the recommendation that we have, do we have any other comments about any of that? So, the recommendation that we have is to review the recommendations which we've done from the Scrutiny Committee on the 29th of September 2022, consider and agree the recommendations for 2022-23 Corporate Performance Monitoring Scorecard. So hopefully you can, you're happy to agree what I've said, we can agree and put forward, because we've got enough work in front of us that the officers have said that they can do quite quickly. And to note that the agreed Corporate Performance Monitoring Scorecard will be presented to the Council on the 11th of October 2022 for information. Are we all agree? Oh, sorry, Fiona.
Sorry, Leader, there's just an amendment to that third one because the council meeting's on the 20th of October.
Well, it's so funny, when I was reading it, I was like, I don't think that's true. Absolutely. So the 20th of October. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Agreed. Thank you very much. I always have to check just in case something snuck in. So no, that's the end of our meeting this evening. Thank you very much for your time. I'd like to thank our speakers, both members of the public and visiting councillors who came to join us. Thank you very much and have a good evening.